Great. So, welcome to the Smooth Brain Society. Today, our guest is Martin Lang. He is the director of the Laboratory for the Experimental Research of Religion at Masaryk University in Czech Republic. Was that how you pronounce it? I have no clue how Czech
That's correct.
works.
So you pronounced everything really nicely, actually, I have to say. So we say the name of our university is Masaryk University. So it's really simple, fortunately. And the name of our lab, you mentioned it, and we just call it by the shorthand, which is Levina. It's
Levina.
actually, it doesn't correspond exactly to the English name. It corresponds to the Czech name, the shortcut. So yeah, so we call it Levina.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining. This is our first guest from the Czech Republic, in that way. So yeah, we're moving up in the world, covering countries we haven't before, which is exciting.
Fantastic.
Farrell is back again. So is she? And as you would have heard from the title of the lab itself, Martin is basically a religious scholar in many ways, but has done work in evolutionary biology at Harvard University and anthropology. And if I look at his website, he describes himself as where is it? I quite love the introduction. I need to go back and
it's at the bottom of the website.
Where is it gone? There it is. Yes. Where he says, I'm a religious scholar by training, psychologist by methodology, anthropologist by interests, and eclectic scientist at heart. And I thought that was very well put. So I'll use that as the introduction, and I'll let you just take us on a little bit of a journey into your background, how you got into your field. You're in the Czech Republic now, but you worked in the States, so maybe a little bit of what all you've covered for people, for our listeners to get to know you a bit.
Okay, yeah, thank you, and thank you for this introduction. So the reason why I describe myself in this way is it's really difficult for me to define me put me into a specific discipline. And as I said, like my diploma is from religious studies, so I guess officially I am a scholar of religion. However, like I think I'm quite different from the majority of scholars of religion by my interest and by the methodology that I'm using. And so the reason for this historically in my career is that I started my religious studies at Masaryk University. And back when I started 15 years ago, almost 20 now, I really got into the usual training. So it was there was a lot of like classical studying of the history of Christianity, Buddhism, and all the world religions. And then also methodologically, there was a lot of comparative stuff, but also a lot of what we call, or some people call it, postmodern approaches to the study of religion. So a lot of reading based on Foucault and Talal Asad and people like this. And that back then I found it interesting, but not too useful, because at some point I felt like we are just critiquing our critiques and it leads nowhere. And during my master studies, I became actually interested more in neuroscience, and I thought maybe we need to look more into our brain to understand why are people religious and why we have all these various religions in the world. So for me, that was kind of paradigmatic shift how to think about the topic that I study. And so my master thesis was on it was still a critique. It wasn't a research, it was still a critique of a subfield which is called neurotheology. And basically what neurotheology is it was popular back then. It's not popular that much right now, but it was a combination, as the name says, between theology and neuroscience. So it was a lot of theologians trying to use neuroscience to demonstrate the existence of God. Not that directly, but that was usually the underlying assumption. So a lot of my critique was spent on trying to deconstruct this assumption and show that, we can't really use this method that way. But it got me really interested in, so what can we say about religious beliefs and behaviors based on our knowledge of the brain. And I got to work with some neuroscientists, and they taught me very useful thing back then, which is if you can do something with pen and paper in terms of methodology, you don't need neuroscience. I mean, you need to start with pen and paper. You don't need all these fancy, expensive machines. Just, like ask your questions in this way first. And then, if you really need neuroscience to answer some of your questions, go that way. So I think that was 10 years ago. Yes, that was 10 years ago. So I think at this point of my career, I am actually trying to get back to neuroscience because I feel like I'm starting to have some of these questions that might be actually answered by fMRI and similar methods. So going back to the starting with pen and paper, that's where another defining point of my career began, which was the founding of the Levina lab that you introduced in the beginning, which was a combination between religious studies students, like graduate students and postdocs, and we got some grant to hire people from neuroscience, from behavioral science, from psychology to help us train in experimental methodology. So that was really unique project back then, I think. And we were very lucky to have great directors. Back then it was William Lee McCorkle and Dimitris Xigalatas. And they basically directed us or pushed us towards trying to think of experiments that we can do with people, with religious people, to answer our questions. And after working in Levina, Dimitris Xigalatas, he got a position at the University of Connecticut at the Antro department, and I started to work with him. Also, I moved to the US to work with him at the Antro department. And there, another important shift for me happened that while at Levina, I was really interested in CogSci and cognitive science and what can it tell us. There at Anthropology, I really was enchanted by evolutionary theory. And suddenly I started to see that all of my questions, to really properly answer them, we need to also understand not only how brain works or how our cognition works, but also why it works this way, how it got there evolutionarily. And so that's part of the question, and that then led me to move to my postdoc, which was actually at Human Evolutionary Biology, to even deeper this interest of mine. And there I worked with Joseph Henrich, and that was a work on a specific project which looked at how a belief in specific type of gods that we call moralizing gods, which are gods that care about our behavior and how we treat others, and they can punish us if we misbehave and so on. So we really try to build a theory of how this could have evolved, and also test this theory cross-culturally. And that's going to be, we are getting closer to the present time. And after finishing my postdoc there, I returned to Levina, to the lab where I started, and brought some of these evolutionary interests with me, and really started to put all my interests together. So those would be interested in cognition, evolution, but also culture. So how we can combine these three things together, so to really understand religion as a complex phenomenon. And I think that's really crucial, because that's why I have difficulty to put myself into a specific discipline, because if you want to study such complex phenomena like religion or culture, you just can't do with one discipline. That's what I learned. And you really need what I call the multi-layered approach, that you need to try to combine knowledge from different disciplines and method from different disciplines to answer the questions about this phenomena. So that's a brief tour of how I got to where I am right now.
Sahir, just before you ask any question, I want you and everyone to know that Martin has basically name dropped all of the cultural evolutionary superstars and celebrities like Joe Henrich and Dimitri Xigalatas. They're like a big deal in the field. So we have a superstar amongst us, by the way.
Okay.
A celebrity.
This is good to know. This is good to know. I wasn't is that why Martin was looking down the whole time? He was looking at the names which he dropped.
Basically.
Okay. That makes sense. I really like the multi-layered statement you made, and your research, by the looks of it, has been very multi-layered, from anthropology to biology to cognitive sciences. I'm thinking, where should we start first? Maybe we should start with the evolutionary side, because I know, like, let's start with evolution and then work our way to present, like we did with your life story. And also because Ayana, when we recorded with her, did speak about the basics of religion. So what religion is, what we think of. So maybe if people want to, they can listen to that episode and we can jump slightly further ahead. So on the evolution side of things, can I ask what your questions were? Like, what were you looking at when you, in terms of evolution and evolution of religion? And then maybe I can ask more from there.
Yes, certainly. So maybe I should just preface this explanation by saying, because I was trained as a scholar of religion, I am sensitive to the fact that saying that religion evolved may be it's maybe an issue for a couple of people, or for a lot of people actually. And just to say that this is not a statement about ontology, like what is and what is not, and if religion exists or if God exists. That's not my purpose here. This is really me having a scientific quote on myself and really using the scientific methodology to ask questions that the methodology allows me to ask. And that's so. This is not really to say that basically it says, if we assume that humans evolved, and I think there are good reasons to assume that, it may also make sense to assume that culture evolved. And within culture, we can ask specific questions about religion and why religion might have evolved. Now, however, this is a really huge question, why religion evolved. And so I would like to narrow it down a bit, because my specific interest is ritual behavior, which we often think of as part of religion, but it doesn't need to be, right? You can think about rituals in the army or in Boy Scouts or what have you. Even in the secular kind of communities, we often have also rituals. So my question, which is a bit more narrow but still pretty vague, is why we have rituals and how rituals have evolved. And this is what I'm really interested in at the moment. And recently, with my colleague Radek Kunt, we proposed an evolutionary model of ritual behavior, what we basically try to do is to ask, okay, so if we assume that ritual behavior evolved because it has some function, it has some adaptive function for humans, when it started to evolve, and can we connect it with behaviors of our close relatives, like the chimpanzees or baboons or other non-human primates, to see if we can trace the evolution of this specific behavior really deep into the human evolutionary history. And so what we did is that first we defined the main function of ritual behavior, and there I really think about collective rituals. So this is the things that we do together that are ritualized. And our proposition is that rituals evolved because they help us to communicate our intentions. And you can think about this as nonverbal communication. Of course, nowadays we have rituals that are very elaborate, very symbolic. There is deep meaning. There is a lot of language, chanting, and so on. But when we think about evolution, we can go actually much deeper. And I think, like with rituals, we can go beyond language and don't even need symbols per se to be present to have ritual communication, or what we call more specifically ritualized communication. And that's where we really get closer to our relatives, the other non-human primates that also have a lot of ritualized communication. And so for us, the starting point was really to see how we can, or like what could have been communicated through rituals. And the proposition that we made based on like a lot of current studies that we see how rituals function is that rituals help us to communicate cooperative intentions. So basically those are intentions that we want to do something with other people. And, like in evolutionary sciences, as it is called, the problem of cooperation is a huge topic. So how could have cooperation evolved? Because we as humans are really, I wouldn't say ultra cooperative species, because this label is used for bees and ants and like these really genetically very closely related species. But for us as humans, we really stand out because we are able to cooperate with a lot of other people who are not necessarily genetically related to us. So we think that ritual is one of the answers. This is how we got to where we are right now, that we are able to cooperate so much. And we can do so because we have means to communicate our cooperative intentions. And other non-human primates do have them as well. Like in baboons, there are these, for example, there are these greetings between males where they, for example, hold each other's genitalia, or they poke fingers under their eyelids. And these are all behaviors that are potentially costly for them, meaning that they are a bit dangerous because they make themselves vulnerable to the others. But by this, they communicate their intention of, I don't want to harm you, I actually want to be friends with you, and I want to do something together. So we have a starting point of like similarity with these other non-human primates. But then obviously when we look at current rituals, they are quite different than what we see in non-human primates. And so the question is like how we got from there to where we are right now. And in the paper that I talk about with my colleague Radek, we identified several evolutionary pressures on human cooperation. That would be like a climate variability, that would be like hunting large game, and all these like external factors that we do not necessarily observe in non-human primates. So, we have a good assumption to assume they don't have these external pressures, so they were not really forced to evolve these other ways to communicate their cooperative intentions. While we as humankind, we had these forces, and for the individuals and the groups that adapted these new types of communication, which we call ritualized communication, we say that it was adaptive for them. However, we faced really a huge problem in trying to find material evidence for these claims. So we are really looking at the span of, let's say, 2 million years of human evolution. And, thinking about detecting in the archaeological record remains of ritual behavior, which may be just gestures, it's impossible. Like, we can't really do it. We do have depictions of ritual behavior, for example, in cave paintings, but these would come usually much later than the ability to actually do the ritual. I would say a couple hundreds of thousands years later. So what we did instead is that we looked at what cognitive mechanisms are necessary for the ritualized communication, and then looked at what other external pressures on these cognitive mechanisms existed. So this would be like over imitation. This would be like theory of mind and these basic psychological mechanisms. And we try to trace their evolution because we have a bit more evidence for it. And then we would say, okay, we have these external pressures occurring at some points in human evolution. We have these mechanisms evolving at some point. So we said, the most basic signals that we call similarities. So this is basically just imitating each other. This could have evolved, for example, 1.8 million years ago. And then we would get a bit more complex with signals that we call coalitional, which means basically I'm signaling that I want to do something with you in the group, go for a hunt, go for a raid of the other group, eventually leading to what we call commitment signals. So these are signals that are a bit more complex because you need to have also a prospective thinking into future, which says we have this cooperative dilemma. For example, we want to go to hunt really some dangerous animal, and we need all of us to really commit to that action, because if someone shirks and don't go eventually, that's going to endanger the rest of the group. So we really need to find a way to communicate our intentions reliably. So this is not just to say, I will do it, because that's just very cheap to say and then not do it. But then from there we get rituals that often involve pain and harming body or sacrificing resources, and all these kind of gestures that are expensive and that often suggests that you are really committed to the action. And we trace the evolution of these commitment signals basically more or less to the emergence of Homo sapiens. Mostly one of the external pressures there would be a really huge basically enlarging of the cooperative groups, so to more anonymous people, and encountering more and more other groups that you don't really have relations with, and there would be also some warfare potentially. And this is where we think really the ritual signals came together and became the basis of what we see now as ritual. And that this might have been all before symbols, before symbolic language, before religion. And so the claim here would be that religion is based on the rituals, and then you get some supernatural beliefs and so on later on, and rituals help you to establish those beliefs and actually keep them in the group and propagate them further and further. But that's basically we end our story here. We just say this is when we think rituals already appeared, and then from there religions may have started to build on that. So sorry, I know this was a bit long, but hopefully it made sense.
No, yeah, that was superb. When you were talking, it actually reminded me of some literature I've read on evolution of language. But I was wondering if you can explain, because I know even on your website you've written about the Haka, so you're well aware of what the All Blacks do. So can you probably explain to our listeners who are mostly from New Zealand, are they? Somewhere, I'm not sure. But what is the cultural evolutionary purpose of the Haka? Like, it is a ritual. How maybe has it enabled cooperation?
Yeah, great question. So to do that, I will get to your question eventually, but I need to start a bit earlier to explain what is over imitation and what is synchronous behavior. So in humans, what we see is that we tend to imitate each other's behavior a lot, much more than other non-human primate species. We do have species that are much more distant from our family that can also over imitate, but in primates we are pretty unique in our ability to really repeat very specific actions of others, which may not necessarily be pragmatic, and that's the point. So that's also one way we can spread culture, because we can imitate things we don't really understand how they work, why we do them, but we just do them because others are doing them. And once we have over imitation, what we can do, basically we can perform behaviors that are matched in time and sequence with others. So that would be like dancing, that would be like music making. And there is a lot of experimental studies showing that performing these behaviors, these synchronous behaviors with others, helps bring people together, basically increases social bonding between people, social cohesion. And we have one study where we show that this effect is underlined by, or that's what we think is underlined by the like a human neurohormonal system. So that would be specifically the beta endorphins. This is really a theory by Robin Dunbar and his group who put it forward, and we did some testing and showed that when people synchronize together and then you let them play an economic game where there is this problem of cooperation, there are some cooperative dilemmas. People who sync together, they cooperate more, but also the cooperation is predicted by the elevation of the beta endorphin. So it's interesting that we ask also people like, how bonded did you feel, how well you cooperated, and so on. And this self-reported question didn't really predict the cooperative behavior in the economic game, but these low-level measures of beta endorphin did. So I found it fascinating. But I'm getting too far from this question. So we have synchrony, and synchrony helps us bond together. But for the Haka case, there is one additional factor that we need to take into account, and which is these performances are more often than not directed towards other members of our group, but they can also be directed towards other groups. And basically by showing how synchronous we are, how cooperative, how coordinated we are, that gives information to the other group. And that information is, you should be afraid of us because we really can cooperate together and we stand for each other. And if you do not have such a level of cooperation, but run away because we will just destroy you. So I think that's my interpretation of why Haka works the way it works.
Well, that's of course in the context of the All Blacks. Haka in general are used for many variety of things and variety different contexts as well. But yeah, what I found very interesting is when you said that when you do something synchronous together, you seem to show to be synchronized in other tasks as well. That was very interesting because it makes a lot of sense for not just a rugby team to do it, but any culture to do some sort of synchronous movement before another task which requires synchronization, doing it and being better at that task. And then therefore that becoming a practicing ritual, because if you do it again and again, and you perform better because you're more synchronized, then one gives rise, well, we say, you knowing that will improve your performance means you will do it again, and it increasing a particular behavior. I want to bring it to something very basic, which I thought about when you mentioned when you were talking about your first part of evolution, and that was smaller behaviors. So I didn't think of it like this, but shaking hands before meeting and just when you meet someone, would those also come under rituals? Although
yes.
I wouldn't necessarily think of it as that.
Yeah.
But then I was thinking how sometimes I judge people based on how their handshake was or how their hug was when they greet you, because you feel like, oh, this was good. You synchronize with them more than with someone else. So it all kind of like fits together with what you were saying.
Yeah. So a couple of points here. First, I will just very quickly follow on you mentioning the synchrony. There is one caveat to that, though, that often what we need in group cooperative task is not necessarily synchrony, it's more coordination. So in one paper, we actually show that when you synchronize first and then do something that requires like not to match each other in time, but actually to complement each other, that then your performance is hampered. But I think like generally the point stands that synchrony is so easy and natural for us to do that it's a great practice to basically just show to ourselves that we can do something together, which is successful. And this success and feeling of joint goal and joint success can translate into other tasks. Now, in terms of your second question, which I successfully forget right now, can you remind me, please, just very, very quickly?
I had just what do you say, brought it down from the Haka, which is more of a whole cultural thing, to something even smaller, like handshakes and basic.
Right. So here the point is, we are the problem a bit we are facing here is the like vagueness and broadness of the term ritual, and so for me, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a ritual, but I would say this is a ritualized behavior. So this gets us a bit closer, again, to our non-human primate cousins, where we describe some behaviors of being ritualized, meaning that they occur more or less in the same way, they occur repeatedly, and we don't necessarily understand the purpose, or we try to get it to get to the purpose by our studies. And so handshake, I think, would for me definitely count this way, because it's a culturally specified way to greet each other. So it doesn't necessarily need to occur. It's not universal, but it's one instance of ritualized behavior where we try to get some information about others, as you mentioned. And I think the signaling that I'm talking about all the time really works here, because you can judge people by how they greet you, and like you can assess their the relationship they have to you and the relationship you have to them. And this is basically the same explanation that primatologists give for these greetings rituals, as they call them for example, in baboons. It's just the assessment of how we are standing right now. And even thinking about like what handshake is, you can imagine that it's also like, we don't think about it right now this way because we live in rather safe societies, like more of or most of us that we talk here today, and so it's just fine for us to shake hands with people we do not know. But it's like, again, evolutionarily speaking, it's a potentially costly gesture by the fact that if you need to get close to someone else and give them your hand, they can attack you. So you are basically showing your trust to others by this gesture. So it's a multi-layered signal, and you can again express a lot of your hidden feelings and intentions to others through this signal. Of course, like I would like call it a cheap signal in a way that it's very easy to manipulate. Like, even if I don't like someone, I can still hug them very, very I don't know, like very emotionally, and really. So then what we need is really these costly and extreme rituals that we study that are more reliable. And then if you don't really feel it, you don't do them. But handshake is a great example.
Awesome. I actually wanted to dive a little bit deeper into your work, which was, and I think it's my area of interest as well, which is, I know a lot of your work is on Hindu rituals. So why did you choose Hinduism as a religion to study over, say, Christianity or other religions? That's my first question. And a second question, which maybe is a selfish question, but I do want to ask it, is Hindu ritual behavior different to ritual behaviors in other religions? And can that explain why Hinduism is still polytheistic and successful, evolutionarily successful, vis-a-vis other polytheistic religions with not so rich ritual behavior? And if that has probably died down. This is simply a selfish question. My whole dissertation is about why Hinduism has survived as a polytheistic religion.
Right. Okay. So I'm afraid I will give you unsatisfactory answers to both of your questions, but I will try. The first answer is really pragmatic, because so what I'm studying mostly are really the cognitive mechanisms that are not necessarily human universal, but the assumption is often there. And like, of course, like these mechanisms, they are affected by cultural settings and by context and so on. But my broader aim is to really be at the level of near universality, and that's where we can ask these evolutionary questions as well. So I do not necessarily focus on a specific religion, but the reason why we did a lot of studies with the Hindu population is pragmatic, because this is a field site of one of my mentors that I mentioned, Dimitris. And since he works in Mauritius, this is where he brought me and where we did a lot of studies together. So I wouldn't definitely describe myself as expert on Hinduism. This is really more of a pragmatic choice, and mostly because, as I said, I'm interested in rituals, and also what we call these costly rituals or extreme rituals. And in Mauritius, and not only in Mauritius, of course, all over the world, we see that some of these Hindu communities still engage in these very painful and extreme rituals. So we really want to understand why they do it and how it works. So then I will not be able to really answer your second question, because I don't feel being an expert on that. But just following up on what I said, we may think that like the presence of these extreme rituals, the still presence, may be one of the factors. I don't know how big it is, but I would bet that this is one of the factors, because the occurrence of these rituals, because like the fact that they still exist, and people put a lot of effort, put a lot of money, put a lot of pain into what they are doing, it can bond the communities, and can signal to one each other, oh, I'm still part of this community. And I really still believe in what our community believes, which is this pantheon of gods, or the specific gods if the ritual is dedicated to a specific god. So this may be, I think, one of the factors why we still see Hinduism as one of the largest world religions. Was it? What do you think, Ferry? Would it be one of your answers as well?
I love it. I'm actually literally making a note of it right now because a little bit of my data actually showed how Hindu gods are not punishing, like morally punishing, but the only spaces that they do tend to get angry is when rituals are incorrectly performed. So I feel like that's a great answer that I need to note down immediately. Oh wait, it's recorded. I don't need to note it down.
Yeah, the case of correctness of ritual performance, this is also an important aspect that I didn't mention. But when you think, I already said what I mean by ritualized behavior. So when you think of rituals, what we notice is that they are often very rigid. So they need to be performed in a specific way. One of the examples this time from Christianity would be, if you have a Christian mass or Catholic mass, it usually ends with the Holy Communion, and there is a specific sequence of actions that need to happen. And if you would come to a Christian mass and the priest would say, "Oh, today I feel like starting with the Holy Communion," you would really feel like, "What's wrong with the world? Like, is he getting crazy?" So this is like the rigidity is really important part. Now, why is it there? That's a good question, and I think that it's really important, and that what distinguishes rituals from other social activities that may communicate cooperative intentions or increase social bonding, like playing sports, music making, and so on, is that this underlines the communicative function. Because if we perform the rituals in the same way, all of us know what to expect, and all of us understand the message that is being sent through rituals. And if all of us would be doing something else, we didn't understand each other. Like, of course, we now have language, so we can communicate, we can explain a lot of things. But if you think about ritual as this pre-symbolic communication device, rigidity and correctedness of performance is actually super important, because it's the clarity of the communication. It's the way to ensure that others understand what you want to convey to them.
Is a little bit of that in line with your earlier mentioning of synchronization and synchronity, that a certain order kind of needs to be followed, or like only certain things in a certain order make sense? Can you also link it to things like music, or where certain notes have to be played after certain notes, otherwise it does not make sense? Or I guess for languages as well, same way, certain words can only be said after certain words.
It gives you like a certain grammar, I would even say, of like it's like a behavioral grammar. And of course, like it's not, again, that we would see it everywhere in all of the rituals. It's not, and it's the same for music. Like, you can think about jazz, and how jazz is actually being based often on improvisation and actually breaking down the patterns, and that's great. But I would say most of the music actually has some clear pattern to it, and like we tend to enjoy it. So that's a similar case with rituals. Like, of course, you can break them, and some people spontaneously came up with rituals, and you can see this a lot in this New Age movements and New Religious movements, that they came up with their own rituals, which are quite personalized and don't necessarily. But there, I think we are getting into a bit different function than we are talking right now. So it's not that much anymore about communicating something to others.
Yeah, really interesting. And using this segment, let me jump onto maybe your current work, which is about atheism. And how is your current work related to ritual practice, if at all, in any way?
It is because excuse me. So my interest in atheism comes from basically the claims I'm making. How rituals help our communities to communicate these cooperative intentions, and my later work that I mentioned very briefly on belief in moralizing gods and how they monitor our behavior, and also stabilize cooperation. Of course, if we make all these claims, the first question that we get usually is, so what's happening in Western cultures, and not only Western cultures, like it's global trend of secularization. If it is so good and so functional, why people are like give up on these things? Why they don't do them anymore? So that's really what brings me here. What brings me to the question of atheism, and specifically the questions I'm asking is, what are the other mechanisms? It's like the general questions. What are the other mechanisms in society that help us to still keep the cooperation level high, and that do not necessarily rely on religious beliefs and religious behaviors, and why we then may see decline in these religious beliefs and behaviors. So that's like one possibility. There is like a shift, like a cultural shift in these mechanisms. The other possibility is that there is actually a shift in these external pressures. So if we think again in evolutionary terms, we have some behaviors that are adaptive because they respond to some external pressures. When we remove these pressures, these behaviors become unnecessary, and they may stay with us, but they may also fade over time, especially if they are costly. And like being religious and attending all these rituals and sacrificing your money and limiting your opportunities in some ways is rather costly. So if you do not have these pressures over generations, you may see actually decline in these practices. So this is like a general question: is it like different mechanism, or is it actually the lack of pressures? So I guess that's the general thing, and we can go deeper into it if you want.
So in that regard, are you saying that evolutionary, are you saying that basically religious rituals in this context, religious rituals are then probably being replaced by other types of rituals in terms of
that may be one possibility, but also like if you think about, let's say, the cooperative dilemma that I talked about, we usually model it in like a small group setting, and that's how rituals work. You need to see each other at the ritual doing something. But if you live in these large societies, it's still possible. You still have your own like communities, religious communities, where you see each other during rituals and so on. But sometimes even this is not happening. And what we may have instead are, let's say, state-based institutions, like the police, like the juridical system, that kind of takes these, take care of these cooperative problems on our behalf. So one possibility is that we don't even need these rituals. However, I think we still need them and we still do them, but they are not necessarily, within the framework of religion. But one example may be that the fact that that has been argued for the case of the United States is that we basically, our communities, the small communities, are slowly being disintegrated, and this, so we have the state level institutions, but we don't have anymore these local institutions, these local communities, which were based around rituals and meeting together, gathering, and doing something together. So it may be also the case that it's not that the rituals are replaced by some other rituals. It may be just that rituals are declining, and it actually has some negative consequences.
I will ask immediately then, what are the negative consequences? Because I saw one of the other things which you work on is relationship between ritualized behavior and anxiety. Johannes Karl, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he came on, and he had came on a while ago and had spoken a little bit about rituals himself, and we got into it a little bit, but not a lot. So could you shed more light on it and talk about your work in terms of rituals and anxiety?
So that's that's what I love about studying rituals. And it's a great puzzle because, we have these seemingly many functions claimed for ritual behavior. And one of the other functions is that they help alleviate anxiety. And the question is, of course, why and also how. And asking the why question, which is really evolutionary question, again, how we got there, that's something I don't have a good answer to yet, because if you think about what I said before about signaling and communication, this anxiety part doesn't seem to fit anywhere in there. So the question is how it got there and why we have, we call the same thing ritual, but we also think it may bond people together, but it may also help them to cope with stressors and uncertainty, and how this is possible. And so I don't know exactly why, what's the evolutionary story. I have some ideas, speculations, but not worked through model. But I know more about the how, and the how again is based on the observable characteristics of rituals that I talked about, that they are often repetitive and they are very rigid and need to be acted in a specific sequence. And I claim this is really important for the communicative function. But I think it's also important for the function of decreasing anxiety, because anxiety is defined by the fact that we don't know what is going to happen and we can't really predict the potential threats in our environment. So it's not that we face some stressors, but we are afraid of some potential risk and dangers. And of course, anxiety, and I need to say this, is a very adaptive mechanism. We need anxiety. It's good, but it's good if it can be diminished and if it's responsive to what is actually happening around us. But more often than not, we see that we don't have this reflective response. Sometimes it's we really feel anxious from stresses that we have no control over. One example is that if you are afraid of flying and some of your close relative flies, and it's you are afraid that they will fall down, for example. What can you do if they are on the plane? You can't do nothing. But as humans, it's of course this will differ inter-individually, but a lot of us just can't stand the thing of just sitting and doing nothing. We have this, what is called compulsion to do something. And that's where we think rituals come in, and they help you to satisfy this compulsion to do something to influence this potential threat. And because they are very well predictable, so you know what is going to happen, you know that you need to do this sequence of actions, it helps. That's what we think how it works. It helps you to get back the sense of control, because you did something, it worked the way it was supposed to be, it was well predictable. And because anxiety is defined by unpredictability and uncertainty, it gave you a sense of you could predict at least something. And this is what helped you to get the sense of control and then alleviate anxiety eventually.
That's really interesting. I want to actually take a little bit of a segue to a question I had slightly before the anxiety question, which is, what is the role of social media then? Wouldn't it allow for signaling and visually signaling rituals? And shouldn't that then counter the technological explanation in the decline of religiosity?
So social media are, I think, generally a bit problematic in a sense, not in the sense of your question, are problematic because they allow for this cheap signaling. And I think we can all empathize with that it's usually I see in my before my face this meme where you see this is something how it looks on Instagram and this is something how it looks in reality, right? And that's what happens in social media. So there's a lot of signaling, and I don't go to Facebook anymore, and it's not trendy now, but when I was young, Facebook was a lot about other people showing you the great things about them, and they would be usually a bit exaggerated, or how great they are, where they traveled, and so on. And it was a bit depressing to see that. But that was all kind of social media allow you to send these signals quite cheaply, and in this sense, they are similar to the problem we have with language. Language is a great coordination tool. Don't get me wrong. It's wonderful that we have language, but it allows you to just express your qualities, your intentions very cheaply. And the same is true for social media, because there is no what we call material anchor. So by that I mean it doesn't need to be performed like rituals. They need to be performed. You need to put your energy, your resources into doing the ritual. While on social media, it's just so easy to manipulate the picture and send it over and send this signal to others. So I think that's also the reason why there is a lot of mistrust on social media, and also that would be one of the negative consequences that I mentioned before of the fact that in some societies, like, the communities are disintegrating because rituals are not happening anymore, and the communication is over these channels which allow deception, basically.
That's a interesting way to put it, because I would have thought of it the other way. Well, not the other way in total, but I was just thinking, when you were talking, I was thinking back to COVID. And during COVID-19, everybody was locked in their respective houses, rooms, whatever. And I remember us trying to keep a lot of our family rituals and things which we do alive over Zoom and things. And it definitely helped with anxiety levels at the time. So as much as we just mentioned social media as a negative thing, there might also be conditions where it is a positive the other way, for the same reasons, that it probably helps carry on rituals which you couldn't do for the environmental stressor you were in.
Yeah, totally. And it's not necessarily counterpoint, that it's a really great clarification. I agree totally with you. And I guess one thing is that, like, you talked about Zoom, I think I had it more in mind, like, really social media, like Facebook and Instagram, or Twitter or X. But yeah, definitely, it's in the end, it's a tool, and different people may use it for different purposes, and I think some communities may thrive, like religious communities may thrive on social media, and it may be like a good tool for them to do their rituals in this way. No particular example comes to my mind at the moment, but it's not something that I would study, so I don't know. So probably these also exist. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, awesome. I feel like I'm well aware of the time. So I was thinking maybe we can ask more specific questions about your explaining atheism project. And can you tell us?
Yes.
Can I just ask one question first before we get to the EA part? I wanted to ask questions about your techniques. So, particularly like your cognitive neurobiology techniques, what are you looking for when you're looking at religion and rituals, and you're talking about techniques like, well, you mentioned just in passing fMRI, EEG, or other cognitive techniques? Where does this overlap come in? What are we trying to look at? What kind of work have you done there?
Right. So, as I said in my introduction, I mostly work with behavioral methods, and so those would be like, often I do, of course, like questionnaire methods. Then I also use nowadays a lot of economic games. I also mentioned, so basically you can have different scenarios, different cooperative dilemmas that you put people into, and you give them real money, so they have incentives to actually behave the way they would behave in real life. And then you manipulate some factors, or you select different people to be playing these games, to learn about their strategies. And like, so just to give you one example, my most recent work is exactly focused on costless signaling. So basically, signaling of cooperative intention in economic game, and if adding cost to this signal help people who have cooperative intentions to actually form groups and cooperate together in these groups, and exclude people who have maybe more selfish strategies. So this would be economic games. And then I think, like, if you think about the levels, then the lowest level I come down to are physiological measures. And there, that's what we use mostly in our studies of anxiety, where we use techniques like electrodermal activity and heart rate variability, and or I mentioned measuring beta endorphin, so that's what we do through a proxy of pain threshold. So this is where I am at right now. So so far, no EEG, no fMRI. So this is so, and that's like, it's on purpose because I didn't feel that I have good questions to ask these methods. But in my future work, where I hope to get soon, is asking question of how human decision making work. That's of course a big question, but more specifically, if you think mechanistically about like deciding in a cooperative dilemma, and if people are religious, how their religious belief comes into this decision making. So the idea is really to try to develop a computational model of how this decision making, like this religious decision making, may work. Is it different from other decision making? And then what is the underlying neurobiology of the decision making? So I don't know much about it. I have a lot of excitement about this question, but no grant money so far. So that's in the future, hopefully.
Yeah. Perfect. So now that we're speaking about in the future, Farrell can ask the EA question then.
Yeah, fingers crossed for more grants to you, Martin. I fully believe in that. But yeah, so tell us a little bit more about your Explaining Atheism project. What are some of your research questions? What are some of your methods? And if you have any findings? Yeah.
Right. So
just for before
ahead.
you start, just for any listeners, Martin's going to come back on later on another episode and talk in detail about that project. So this is more of a snippet to see kind of what we are, where we are at.
Yeah, this is actually a great point. So I will just make a teaser. No spoilers, just the question. So maybe I will just specify more the question I'm asking and the methods I'm using. So I already said that we want to know how these ritual functions and the functions of religion that I talked about, how they work in current societies, and why we see decline in those practices and beliefs. And the more specific question is really what are the external factors? And one suggestion that has been made quite, I would say, quite loudly in the literature, especially by sociologists, is the idea that basically we do not have, at least in some societies, like our lives are much more predictable, much more safe, and much more basically we are better off in terms of well-being and our resources and so on. So, and we do not face that many dangers. And so these sociologists, and that would be Ronnie Engelhardt and Pippa Norris, they use this large-scale data set, which is called the World Value Survey. So it's basically this more or less the same questionnaire distributed across hundreds of countries, or sorry, not hundreds, but 130, I think, or 140 countries in some waves, so every 5 or 10 years. And so they have really this huge, enormous data set, and they can trace some of their ideas in their data. So basically they are showing, the lower the mortality rate or the infant mortality rate in a country, the higher the secularization trends and so on. So this is a really powerful theory. But they often mention, like, they have a lot of assumptions because they look mostly at correlational data. So this is like problematic if you want to think about causal mechanisms. And so they make, or the two assumptions that I'm interested in is, one is that they say, these changes that we observe often happen because of the influence of adolescence, during adolescence. So this is where, like, the most rapid development of the human individual happen, and this is where we are really sensitive to the external world and to the communities around us and how they behave and the values they have. And because it's and this is where we, like, people decide most often about, like, it's not a conscious decision necessarily, but they decide about whether they will be religious, whether they will continue what their parents told them to do. So, parents socialize their kids into some sort of religious beliefs and behaviors, but then during adolescence, we often see that the kids either, stop doing that or continue doing that. And so Norris and Engelhardt are saying this is the sensitive period, and if the adolescents are safe in this period and are generally well off, more likely they will abandon religion. But it's just an assumption, and they have no way to test it with their data. But there is a data set which is called National Study of Youth and Religion in America, I think. And basically we have 4 waves of data from the age of 12 up to the age of 25. And it's like a longitudinal study with the same people and tracking their religious beliefs and behaviors through adolescence. And we have also data from the first wave about like the well-being of their parents. So basically, how much they earn, how safe they feel, and so on. So what we can do with this data set, we can actually test some of these claims and see whether the kids who were well off in the beginning, whether they were more likely to actually stop believing in God. So that's one of the assumptions that we will test or we are working on. The other one is really the causal assumption about the external factors, and that's where my expertise in experimental methodology comes in. And what we want to do is using the paradigm of economic games. So again, like we will put people under some cooperative dilemmas with other people, and we will manipulate these external pressures. How exactly we will do it, I'm not sure yet. We need to pilot it, but the idea is just to basically increase, the way people feel, or increase the level of how people feel threatened by their economic prospects, by their safety, and so on. So, like, simulate these external factors, and then see how they decide in economic games based on several options relating to religious beliefs and behaviors. And by that I mean, like, we can have secular people being able to play these economic games in religious groups, for example, and we will see if they feel threatened, if they are more likely to select these religious groups, and the same way we can do for religious people. So there we can really test some of like more nuanced theories that were also proposed about whether it's the costliness of religious beliefs that prevents people from joining these religious groups if they are well off, or if it's because we have other institutions and so on. So I think this is going to be really interesting experimental work, but this is right now in stage of piloting. So, and the same goes for the longitudinal data set. We are starting with the analysis, but the results, I think, we will need to save them for the next episode.
Yeah, really exciting work. I just had a quick follow-up, which is, how does the existential security hypothesis, the work of Norris and Engelhardt, work with the theory of creds, which is credibility enhancing displays? Because regardless if children are secure and even they've grown up in a safe environment, but they're exposed to credible signals, signals of religiosity that are expensive. So how do they work with each other? They seem sometimes opposing, sometimes synchronous.
Yes, no, I agree. I think what we need to think here, or maybe dispel some common assumption, which I see especially in psychological literature, is that religiosity is not necessarily a trait. Like one of my other goals, my other projects that I try to get funding to, is really try to measure fluctuations in religious beliefs and attitudes throughout a week or even a month. And I think there will be, fluctuations. And then if you look at lifetime, like we already have data to see that, people, like, it's not some people are really stable all the time, but most people are really like fluctuating. And so these creds, they are one factor pushing the adolescents to, believe and behave, but it's just one factor. And, then you need to count in also their peers and other factors that influence them. And so I think the prediction we can make is, you live in a dangerous environment, but there is no creds, low probability of developing religious beliefs and behaviors. But then you have safe environments, creds, pretty likely that the beliefs and behaviors will be developed. But, when the creds start to be weaker because the kid is now grown up adult, then, you may see decline. And I think that's what we see a lot in some of the Western countries, that it's like during the 20s, that's where people basically, just leave their home and go to study at the university, and that's where most of the decline then happens. So I think creds are still important, but it's just one factor.
Yeah, I absolutely love that answer. That was so good. Sahil, should we wrap up?
Yeah, sure. We can wrap up.
Just before we wrap up, Martin, just for Instagram, can you give us like a 30 seconds summary, like a verbal summary of your project, so we can put it up on Instagram?
Okay, so that should be the Explaining Atheism project.
Yes.
Can I? I'm thinking. Of course, I can. I'm just thinking whether it would be maybe easier just to read it from my project proposal, or is it cheating? And maybe it will not look good.
That's fine. That's fine. It's up to you. Your choice. You can even write it down and prepare it for next time if you want.
Let me try to read it and look like I'm not reading it.
Okay.
What do you think? Let's try it, and if it will not work, I can record it later. So the assumption is that you will have some kind of playlist of these Explaining Atheism projects. So people will generally know what the funding is about. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let me just do it. Okay, so the central question of my project is whether increased existential security may cause atheism, or I'm more focused on non-theism, which mean, sorry, let me start again, because I just realized that this will not get into 30 seconds when I start to explain what is non-theism.
You don't need to explain what non-theism is, because on the Instagram page we've already explained what non-theism is.
Fantastic. Okay.
And also if they want to understand what it is, they can tune into the full podcast. This is for
30 seconds. Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. So the central question of my project is whether increased existential security may cause non-theism. And to answer this question, I will use a combination of longitudinal panel data and randomized control experiments, where I will try to compare between different competing explanations of the increase of non-theism.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah,
that was 30
that's
seconds.
more than enough.
Okay, good. So that was it. Okay, good.
Awesome. All right. So should we do the wrap-up questions then?
Yes, let's do that.
Considering Martin's coming on twice, we need to prepare a second set of questions for when he comes on again. But first one, again, Pharaoh, you can start.
So Martin, these are just like rapid-fire questions, just to understand who you are as a person beyond an academic.
Okay.
Okay. So summer or winter?
Winter.
Oh.
Movies or TV shows?
Movies.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Good answer.
If you could have a superpower, what superpower would it be?
I'm thinking of a Superman superpower, so I can save other people. So it's, I guess, a combination of superpowers. I know it's cheating, sorry.
Okay, If you could live any, what's your favorite cuisine or food?
Right now, and I think it's East Asian cuisine, because they don't work with milk products and they have tofu, and so
Oh yeah,
we
Martin's
like.
vegan and he's like very successful at veganism.
Okay, cool. So then I can ask you this: what is the ugliest fruit or vegetable?
Ugliest by that. Okay.
Take it how you want.
Okay. Celery. Is it in English? Celery? Yeah.
Yeah.
The bulb.
Yeah.
I agree.
If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?
Czech Republic. I'm really happy where I am. No, but if let's put it, I will answer this way. If I should move somewhere, I would move to Canada, I think.
Why Canada?
I love Vancouver.
Okay. Oh, is it because of UBC? I forget. I was like, they don't do any ritual practices there.
No, yeah.
Isn't the beer cheaper in Czech Republic though?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
That's why it's my first choice.
There you go. All right. What is something stupid someone's tricked you into believing or doing?
Oh, that's a good one.
Oh, that's a tough one. I can tell you the other way around, but this one, you got me on this one. I don't know. I really try to be critical of others' propositions, so I'm not. I would put myself on the shoulder and say I'm not easily convinced about stupid things, but yeah, sorry, I don't know. Nothing comes to my mind at the moment. This is a tough one.
We convinced you to come on this podcast.
Now it was wonderful. That wasn't stupid. Yes, it doesn't count. Thank you for the suggestion, but that doesn't count.
Okay, last one, which is if you were not doing this, what would you be doing?
I would be working on my Explaining Atheism project. But by this you mean the podcast or the things I talked about?
We meant your work now.
Yeah, right. Okay, so that's a fabulous question. I think my preference would be, so there are two ways I can answer this. One is like my curiosity, and what I think I would be really like to doing is stay in academia but study more animals than humans. That's one way, and the other way to answer, which is more I would say idealistic, is to be more in helping professions, which is still something I can do and maybe I will do, but by that I mean like, using my skills, like research skills, to actually try to help people more, which is not something I'm doing right now. And I would like to. It's difficult with the basic research I do. So that's hopefully what I would be doing otherwise.
Do you feel your current work has like quite a few steps before it actually helps people?
Yeah. I mean, it can, like my work on anxiety, it's getting, I think, the closest. But still translating it into something like practical feels like a long way.
All right.
Yeah, I feel that way.
Final question, which we ask every guest, is if you could leave all our listeners with one piece of advice, what would that be?
Okay. I would say think about what other people tell you and the way they tell you, and also about the things they do not tell directly, but the way they express it and how they behave, how much time they spend with you, and so on. And because all these things that, of course, relate to what I study are important, because all those things can be thought of as signals of how much they appreciate you and how much they like you. And so we don't need to necessarily rely on what exactly they say, but also we can get a lot of how they say it and how they behave.
That's such good
That's really
advice.
nice.
That could be such good relationship advice as well.
See, applied science. I applied my science right now. Thank you.
You're already helping people. There you go. I gave you the opportunity and you took it with both hands. Okay, so thank you so much for coming on. We look forward to having you and talking about your Explaining Atheism project in the
Right.
future. So that will be exciting. Again, thanks Farrell for coming on, introducing Martin to the rest of us. And yeah, until next time, everyone, take care. Follow Martin's advice with all the verbal and non-verbal cues. And yeah,
Yeah.
take care.
Thank you for the invitation. Bye-bye.
Bye.